"Don't sign that," the waitress said quietly, and for a moment, no one in the room breathed. The private dining room at Lawrence was designed for power, all dark wood panels and soft amber light, the kind of place where deals worth millions were made between courses and sealed with a handshake over aged bourbon. And tonight was no different, except for the girl standing just behind the CEO's chair, holding a tray she hadn't moved in the last 10 seconds, her posture still, her eyes fixed on a single line in the contract resting beneath Daniel Brooks' hand. Daniel didn't look up at first, his pen hovering over the signature line, his focus sharpened by years of closing high-stakes deals, the voices of his partners fading into background noise as he calculated risk, leverage, timing, but something in her tone, calm, not loud, not desperate, cut through that noise in a way nothing else had. He paused, just slightly. The German investor across the table shifted in his seat, a flicker of irritation crossing his face before it disappeared behind a polished smile, the kind practiced over decades of negotiation. "Excuse me," Daniel said, finally looking up, his voice controlled, measured, the way it always was when someone stepped out of line. The waitress didn't flinch. Emily Carter. That was the name on her tag, though he hadn't noticed it until now. Most people in her position learned quickly to stay invisible, to move quietly between tables and never interrupt, especially not during a meeting like this. But she hadn't moved, not even an inch. "You shouldn't sign that," she repeated, softer this time, as if the volume didn't matter, as if the truth carried its own weight. A subtle tension spread across the table, like a shift in air pressure before a storm, the other executives exchanging quick glances, unsure whether to be amused or offended, while the investor let out a small, dismissive chuckle. "I believe we were in the middle of something," he said, his accent smooth, his smile tighter now. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her for the first time, really studying her, taking in the details he would normally ignore, the steady way she held herself, the absence of hesitation in her gaze, the way her eyes didn't dart or drop like someone who had made a mistake. "Do your job," he said, not harsh, but firm enough to re-establish the boundary. For a second, it seemed like that would be the end of it. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, but she didn't leave. Instead, she set the tray down with deliberate care, the soft clink of glass against wood echoing louder than it should have in the sudden quiet, and stepped just a little closer, close enough to point, just once, at a small paragraph buried near the bottom of the page. "That clause," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's not standard." The investor's smile froze, just for a fraction of a second, so quick most people would miss it, but Daniel didn't. He never missed anything that small. His eyes dropped to the line she indicated, scanning it again, slower this time, the words rearranging themselves in his mind, the phrasing slightly off, the structure subtly altered, like something translated, but not quite right. "It's German," one of his associates said, shrugging lightly. "Legal variation." Emily shook her head, just once. "It's not German," she said. "Not the way it's written." The room stilled. Completely. Daniel's pen touched the paper, then stopped. His pulse, steady a moment ago, shifted just enough to notice. He looked back at her, really looked this time, and for the first time since she spoke, there was something new in his expression. Not annoyance, not curiosity, something sharper. "Then what is it?" he asked. Emily met his gaze, unblinking, her voice calm, almost gentle. "It's a rewrite," she said, "and it changes everything." No one spoke for 3 full seconds, and in a room where seconds usually cost thousands of dollars, that silence felt heavier than any argument. Daniel Brooks did not move his hand from the contract, but he did not sign either. His eyes traced the clause again, slower now, each word settling into place with a clarity that had not been there before, and something subtle shifted behind his expression, something almost imperceptible but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look. The investor leaned forward slightly, his fingers laced together on the table, his tone still smooth but carrying a new edge. "I assure you," he said, "everything in that document has been reviewed by legal teams on both sides." Emily did not respond to him. She did not even look at him. Her attention remained on Daniel, as if he were the only person in the room that mattered. "The wording changes liability," she said quietly. "Not immediately. Later, when it is harder to reverse." One of Daniel's associates let out a short laugh, uneasy, trying to diffuse the tension. That is a pretty serious claim for someone who is not even part of the meeting. Emily's gaze flickered, just once, toward the document again. Line 12, she said. The phrasing looks standard, but it is not. It shifts responsibility for regulatory compliance after the second quarter. Daniel's pen lifted from the paper, just slightly. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus, the kind that had built his company from a single office into a global operation. He had seen contracts like this before, had written them, negotiated them, dismantled them. But now, with her words echoing in his mind, the structure revealed something else, something buried beneath the surface. The investor's smile returned, but it did not reach his eyes. This is highly inappropriate, he said, his voice tightening. If your staff is going to interfere with private negotiations, perhaps we should reconsider the setting. Daniel did not answer him. Not yet. He was still looking at the clause, still turning it over in his mind, the pieces aligning in a way they had not a moment ago. Explain it, he said finally, his voice low, directed at Emily. The room shifted again. Now it was not a waitress interrupting. Now it was the CEO asking her to continue. Emily did not hesitate. It is written to look like a translation, she said. But it is not direct. It is structured to pass a quick read. The responsibility moves quietly, from your side to theirs, but only after the deal is locked in and public. At that point, backing out would cost you more than accepting it. One of the executives frowned, leaning closer to the document. That is not possible, he muttered. We reviewed this. You reviewed what you expected to see. Emily replied, still calm, still steady. Not what is actually there. The investor's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the table. Just for a second. Daniel saw it. And that was enough. He set the pen down. Deliberately. The sound was soft, but in the silence, it carried. We are not signing tonight, he said. No anger. No raised voice. Just a decision. The investor's expression hardened, the polished mask slipping just enough to reveal something underneath, something less controlled. That would be a mistake, he said. Daniel finally looked up at him, his gaze sharp now, fully present. No, he said. Signing would be. Then, after a brief pause, his attention returned to Emily, studying her again. But this time there was no dismissal in his eyes, no trace of assumption. Only one question, clear and direct. How do you know this? The question did not echo loudly, but it landed with weight, and for the first time since she had spoken, Emily Carter paused, not out of hesitation, but as if she were deciding how much truth the room could hold. Daniel Brooks did not look away. He was used to answers coming quickly, cleanly, especially from people in positions of authority, but this was different, and he knew it, the same way he knew when a deal was too perfect, when numbers aligned too neatly, when something beneath the surface did not match what was being presented. The investor shifted again, impatience now visible, his polished composure beginning to fracture at the edges. This has gone far enough, he said, his tone sharper now, less controlled. Your staff has overstepped, and this conversation is no longer productive. Emily finally turned her head, just slightly, acknowledging him for the first time, but there was no apology in her expression, no fear, only a quiet awareness that seemed to see through the performance he was trying to maintain. Then she looked back at Daniel. Because it is not just language, she said. It is pattern. Daniel's brow tightened, just a fraction. That word meant something to him. Pattern meant repetition, structure, intention. What pattern, he asked. Emily stepped closer to the table, not enough to invade space, but enough that the contract sat clearly between them, like a shared object neither of them could ignore. The clause is written to pass legal review, she said. But the structure mirrors a known negotiation tactic. It delays the shift in responsibility until after public commitment, when reversal becomes reputational damage instead of a financial decision. One of the executives leaned back, frowning, his confidence slipping. You are saying this is intentional. Emily did not answer immediately. She did not need to. The silence did it for her. Daniel felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. The kind that comes when a possibility you did not consider suddenly becomes the only one that makes sense. He turned his gaze back to the investor, watching closely now, not just listening to words, but observing the spaces between them, the micro expressions, the timing, the way his fingers tapped once against the table before going still again. "Is it?" Daniel asked, his voice calm, almost too calm, intentional. The investor held his gaze for a moment, then smiled again, but this time it felt practiced, constructed in real time rather than worn comfortably. "You are taking the opinion of a waitress over a signed agreement," he said. "That is a surprising strategy." Daniel did not respond to the provocation. His attention shifted back to Emily, and there was something new in his expression now, something sharper than curiosity. "You still have not answered my question," he said. Emily met his eyes, steady, unflinching, and when she spoke, her voice did not rise, did not dramatize the moment. It simply existed, clear and undeniable. "I used to work in intelligence," she said. The words did not fill the room, but they emptied it. Every sound seemed to fall away, replaced by a stillness that pressed in from all sides. One of the executives blinked, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Another shifted in his seat, the leather creaking louder than it should have. The investor did not move at all. Daniel did, just slightly. His posture changed, his shoulders no longer relaxed against the chair, his focus narrowing entirely on her, as if the rest of the room had faded into irrelevance. "What kind of intelligence?" he asked quietly. Emily's gaze did not waver. "The kind that reads what is not written," she replied. And for the first time that night, Daniel Brooks felt something he had not expected to feel in a room he controlled. Not uncertainty, not doubt, but the unmistakable realization that he had almost missed something important, and the only person who saw it was the one no one had been looking at. The words lingered longer than they should have, not because they were loud, but because they explained too much with too little, and Daniel Brooks felt the shift immediately, like a quiet recalibration of everything he thought he understood about the room, about the deal, about her. No one challenged her this time. Not immediately. The investor's confidence, once smooth and effortless, now carried a weight it had not before, his posture slightly more rigid, his eyes sharper, as if recalculating in real time. "That is a very vague statement," he said after a moment, his tone measured, careful. "Intelligence can mean many things." Emily did not react to the attempt to diminish it. She simply stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, her presence unchanged, as if labels did not matter to her. "It means I learned to notice what people try to hide," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly, his mind moving faster now, replaying the last 10 minutes, the clause, the phrasing, the investor's timing, the small hesitation he had seen earlier, the one most people would miss. It was not one thing. It was the pattern. He understood that now. "And you are certain," he said, his voice low, controlled, "that this is not standard variation." Emily's eyes flickered to the document again, then back to him. "If it were standard, it would not need to be hidden inside familiar structure," she replied. One of the executives shifted uncomfortably, the confidence he carried into the meeting now replaced with uncertainty. "We had legal review this twice," he said, almost to himself. "3 times, another corrected, though it sounded less convincing the second time." Daniel did not look at them. His attention remained fixed on Emily, as if she were now the only reliable variable in a room that had suddenly become unstable. "Walk me through it," he said. It was not a request. It was an invitation. Emily stepped closer again, her movement unhurried, precise, and for a brief second, the room felt less like a restaurant and more like something else entirely, something quieter, more focused, where every word mattered. She pointed to the clause once more. "This phrase," she said, "it looks like a conditional safeguard, but it is not written in direct legal German. It borrows structure from financial disclosure language instead. That is unusual." Daniel leaned in slightly, following her finger, his mind tracking each detail she highlighted, each inconsistency, each subtle deviation from what should have been predictable. "And that matters because," he prompted. "Because it creates ambiguity," Emily said. "And ambiguity, in contracts like this, benefits only one side." The investor leaned back, his expression tightening further, the polite facade now clearly strained. "You are speculating," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had earlier. Emily looked at him again, briefly, and there was something in her gaze that did not challenge him, did not confront him, but simply acknowledged him, as if she had already accounted for his response before he spoke. "No," she said softly. I am recognizing a structure I have seen before. The words landed differently this time. Heavier. Daniel felt it. Not just the content, but the confidence behind it, the absence of doubt, the quiet certainty that did not need reinforcement. He straightened slightly, his decision already forming, not out of impulse, but out of alignment, the kind that came when scattered pieces suddenly made sense. We are done here, he said, his voice calm but final. The room went still again, but this time it was not confusion. It was consequence. The investor's jaw tightened, his composure finally cracking just enough to reveal frustration beneath the surface. You are making a decision based on a server's opinion, he said, the word server carrying a deliberate weight. Daniel looked at him, and for the first time since the meeting began, there was no trace of politeness left in his gaze. Only clarity. No, he said. I am making a decision based on information I almost ignored. Then, after a brief pause, his eyes returned to Emily, studying her with a level of attention he reserved for very few people. And that, he added quietly, is not something I do twice. The decision settled into the room like a quiet verdict, and no one moved to challenge it this time. Not directly, because there was something in Daniel Brooks' tone that made it clear the conversation had already ended, even if the meeting had not officially been dismissed. Papers remained on the table, untouched now, their importance fading by the second, replaced by something less tangible but far more significant. Emily Carter stepped back slightly, not as a retreat, but as a return to her place, her role, as if what had just happened did not belong to her, even though every eye in the room was now fixed on her in a way they had not been before. One of the executives cleared his throat, attempting to recover some sense of structure. We can have legal. Re-examine the clause, he said, his voice careful, measured. It might be a misunderstanding. Daniel did not look at him. His gaze remained on Emily, steady, thoughtful, as if he were trying to solve a different equation now, one that had nothing to do with contracts or numbers. It is not a misunderstanding, he said quietly. The investor let out a controlled breath, leaning forward once more, his composure partially restored, though the edges were no longer as smooth. You are walking away from a strategic partnership based on a theory, he said. That is not how leaders operate. Daniel's expression did not change. No, he replied. Leaders operate by knowing when something does not feel right. The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind built over years of decisions that could not be undone. The investor held his gaze for a moment longer, then leaned back, the tension in his posture easing just enough to suggest acceptance, or at least recognition that pushing further would not change the outcome. Very well, he said finally, his voice cooler now. We will revisit this another time. Daniel gave a slight nod, nothing more, and the meeting dissolved without ceremony, the quiet hum of the restaurant slowly returning as chairs shifted and conversations resumed at other tables, unaware of how close a different outcome had come to being signed into place. One by one, the executives gathered their belongings, their earlier confidence replaced with subdued reflection, their eyes occasionally drifting toward Emily as if seeing her for the first time, not as part of the background, but as something else entirely. Within minutes, the room began to empty, leaving only Daniel and Emily standing near the table, the contract still resting where it had been, untouched. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was different now, not tense, not uncertain, but deliberate, as if both understood that what came next mattered in a different way. Emily reached for the tray she had set down earlier, lifting it with the same quiet precision she had carried all evening, her movements smooth, unhurried, as if she were simply returning to her shift, to the role everyone expected her to play. Wait, Daniel said. The word was not sharp, not commanding, but it carried enough weight to stop her. She turned back to him, her expression unchanged, calm, attentive. Daniel studied her again, but now there was no assumption left in his gaze, no trace of dismissal, only a focused curiosity that bordered on respect. You saw all of that, he said slowly. In a few seconds. Emily considered the question for a moment, not because she did not have an answer, but because she seemed to choose her words carefully, as if precision mattered more than speed. Not just tonight, she said. Patterns take time. Daniel nodded once, absorbing that, the implications settling in his mind. This was not luck. It was not instinct alone. It was something built, something practiced. You said you used to work in intelligence, he continued. Why are you here? It was not judgment in his voice. It was something else, something closer to understanding. Emily held his gaze, steady as before, but this time there was a faint shift in her expression, something almost imperceptible, like a memory passing behind her eyes. Because sometimes, she said quietly, the safest place to observe is where no one is looking. And for the first time that night, Daniel Brooks did not have an immediate response, because the truth in that sentence was not something you argued with. It was something you recognized, and once you did, you could not unsee it. Daniel did not move for a moment after she spoke, not because he did not understand, but because he did, and that understanding carried more weight than any answer she could have given him directly, the kind that settled slowly, reshaping everything around it. The restaurant noise had returned in fragments, low conversations, the soft clink of glass, distant laughter from another table. But at their table, it still felt quiet, contained, as if the space between them existed outside of everything else. Emily adjusted the tray slightly in her hands, her posture composed, ready to leave, to disappear back into the rhythm of the room where she belonged, or at least where everyone assumed she did. You are wasted here, Daniel said finally. The words came out more direct than he intended, but he did not take them back. Emily tilted her head just a fraction, not defensive, not surprised, simply acknowledging the statement without accepting it. That depends on what you think this is, she replied. Daniel almost smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. A restaurant, he said. A place where people bring food and clear tables. Emily's gaze softened, just slightly, as if the simplicity of his answer revealed more than he realized. Or a place where people talk, she said, where they think no one is listening. Daniel held her gaze, the implication settling in. He had spent years in boardrooms, private offices, secured calls, believing control came from choosing the environment, but now he could see the flaw in that assumption, the blind spot he had not accounted for. You have been listening, he said. It was not a question. Emily did not deny it. Observing, she corrected gently. Daniel nodded once, slowly, the distinction not lost on him. Observing meant patience. It meant discipline. It meant choosing when to act and when to remain invisible. And tonight, he said, you decided to act. Emily's fingers shifted slightly against the tray, a small movement, almost unnoticeable. Tonight, she said, it mattered. There was no emphasis, no attempt to justify, just a quiet statement of fact, and that, more than anything, told him she did not intervene often, only when necessary. Daniel glanced down at the contract again, still resting on the table, now meaningless paper instead of a binding decision, and for the first time, he allowed himself to consider what would have happened if she had not spoken, how easily he would have signed, how confidently he would have walked away believing he had made the right choice. The realization did not unsettle him. It sharpened him. You changed the outcome of a deal worth over $50 million, he said, his voice even. Emily did not react to the number. I changed a mistake, she replied. Daniel let out a quiet breath, something almost like a laugh, but without humor, more recognition than amusement. Most people would have said nothing, he said. Emily's eyes met his again, steady, clear. Most people were not looking, she answered. The simplicity of it left no room for argument. Daniel studied her in silence for a few seconds longer, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulling out a card, placing it on the table between them, not sliding it toward her, not pushing, just setting it there, an option rather than an instruction. I do not offer this lightly, he said. Come work for me. The words hung in the air, direct, unembellished, carrying the weight of opportunity that most people would not hesitate to accept. Emily's gaze dropped briefly to the card, then lifted back to him, her expression unchanged, calm, almost thoughtful. She did not reach for it. Not yet. You think I would fit in your world, she said, not as a challenge, but as a consideration. Daniel did not hesitate. I think, he said, you already understand it better than most people in it. For a moment, neither of them moved, the card resting untouched between them, a silent question waiting to be answered, and in that stillness, it became clear that whatever decision she made next would not be about money, or status, or convenience, but something else entirely, something quieter, something rooted in the same place that had made her speak when no one else did. Emily did not reach for the card, not immediately, and that pause, that deliberate stillness, told Daniel more than any quick acceptance ever could, because in his world, people moved fast when opportunity appeared. They leaned in, they negotiated, they calculated gain, but she did none of that. She simply stood there, as if the weight of the decision had nothing to do with what was being offered and everything to do with what it meant. Her eyes rested on the card for a brief moment, then lifted again, steady, composed. "You are assuming I am looking for something different," she said quietly. Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her, adjusting his understanding in real time, the way he always did when new information disrupted his expectations. "Most people are," he replied. Emily's lips curved just a fraction, not quite a smile, more an acknowledgement of a truth that applied broadly, but not universally. "Most people have not already seen what that world requires," she said. Daniel did not interrupt. He waited. That, too, was new. Emily shifted the tray slightly in her hands, the motion subtle, grounding. "You think this is beneath me," she continued, "but you are measuring value by visibility." The words landed softly, but precisely, and Daniel felt the correction immediately, not as criticism, but as clarity, the kind that did not need emphasis to be understood. "And you are not," he said. Emily shook her head once. "I measure it by control," she replied. Daniel's brow tightened slightly, interest sharpening again. "Control," he repeated. Emily nodded. "Out there," she said, her gaze drifting briefly toward the dining room. The quiet flow of conversations, the unnoticed exchanges happening at every table. People believe they are in control because they are seen, because they are heard, because they make the decisions everyone notices. She looked back at him. But real control is quieter than that. Daniel felt the truth in that before he fully processed it, the way certain insights bypass logic and settle directly into recognition. He had built his life on visible control, measurable influence, decisions that moved markets, shaped industries, and yet, in this moment, standing across from someone who had chosen invisibility, he could see the limits of that approach. "So you stay here," he said, not as a judgment, but as an attempt to understand. Emily did not hesitate. "For now," she said. The answer was simple, but it carried something else beneath it, something that suggested this was not permanent, but intentional. Daniel glanced at the card again, still resting where he had placed it, untouched, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel the need to push, to convince, to close. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving the moment space. "You would have access to more information with me," he said, his tone calmer now, less persuasive, more observational. Emily considered that, her gaze steady. "Information is not the problem," she replied. "Access is not the same as insight." Daniel let out a quiet breath, something between acknowledgement and acceptance. "And you already have insight," he said. Emily did not answer directly. She did not need to. The silence that followed carried it for her. Around them, the restaurant continued as if nothing had happened, plates moving, glasses refilled, conversations flowing. But at their table, something had shifted in a way that could not be reversed, not for him. Daniel looked at her one more time. Really looked, not at the uniform, not at the role, but at the presence behind it, the discipline, the awareness, the quiet precision that had changed the outcome of his night without raising her voice. "If you ever decide you want a different vantage point," he said, nodding once toward the card, "you know where to find me." Emily followed his gaze briefly, then looked back at him, her expression unchanged, calm, self-assured. "And if you ever want to understand what you almost missed," she said softly, "you know where to look." The words settled between them, not as a challenge, not as a lesson, but as a quiet truth, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel Brooks felt something unfamiliar, not loss, not regret, but perspective, the kind that did not come from power, but from seeing clearly, even if only for a moment. Daniel did not leave immediately, and that alone would have surprised anyone who knew him well, because his time was measured, allocated, optimized down to the minute, and yet he remained seated for a few seconds longer than necessary, his eyes drifting not to the contract, not to his phone, but to the room itself, as if seeing it differently now, as if recalibrating something internal that had gone unquestioned for years. Emily had already turned away, her role reclaiming her as seamlessly as if nothing had happened, her movements blending back into the quiet rhythm of the restaurant, taking an order at a nearby table, refilling a glass, offering a polite nod. And yet, now that he had seen her, Daniel could not unsee the precision in those small actions, the awareness behind them, the way she positioned herself to observe without drawing attention, the way her eyes registered more than they revealed. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket, but his attention remained fixed on her, not in a way that demanded acknowledgement, but in a way that studied patterns, confirming what he had already begun to understand. Across the room, a couple leaned in close, speaking in low voices, their words indistinct but their body language clear, while at another table, two men in tailored suits exchanged documents with casual familiarity, their conversation appearing light, but their eyes sharp, calculating. It had always been like this. He knew that, but he had never considered how much passed unnoticed in plain sight, how many decisions were shaped in places like this, outside of boardrooms, outside of formal negotiations, in spaces where people felt unobserved. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a reminder of the world waiting for him outside. Meetings, calls, decisions that could not be delayed, but he did not reach for it. Not yet. Instead, he glanced once more at the table, at the card he had left behind, still resting exactly where he had placed it, untouched, a silent marker of an offer that had not been accepted, but also not dismissed. That, too, was new. Daniel Brooks was not accustomed to uncertainty in outcomes. He created outcomes. He controlled them. And yet, here, in this quiet space, control had taken on a different meaning, one that did not rely on authority or visibility, but on something far more subtle. Emily returned briefly, not to him, but to clear the table, her movements efficient, professional, as if the conversation they had shared existed in a separate layer of reality, one that did not interfere with her present task. She gathered the contract without comment, stacking it neatly with the other items, her fingers pausing for just a fraction of a second on the edge of the paper, as if acknowledging what it had represented, then continuing without hesitation. Daniel watched that moment closely. Most people would have lingered. Most people would have said something. She did neither. "You are going to throw that away," he said quietly. Emily glanced at him, then at the contract, her expression neutral. "It is not mine to keep," she replied. Daniel considered that, the simplicity of it, the clarity, and then gave a small nod, understanding the boundary she maintained, not just in action, but in principle. "No," he said after a moment. "It is not." The words carried a different meaning now, one that extended beyond the paper itself. Emily placed the documents on the tray, lifting it with the same steady precision, then stepped back, creating space, not as distance, but as respect, as if recognizing that whatever shift had occurred between them did not require proximity to exist. Daniel reached for his phone finally, glancing at the screen, the familiar flood of notifications waiting for his attention, but for the first time in a long time, they felt secondary, less urgent than the thought forming quietly in the back of his mind. He looked up once more, meeting her gaze briefly, and in that moment, there was no hierarchy, no assumption, no dismissal, only recognition, the kind that did not need to be spoken aloud. Then he turned, walking toward the exit, the door opening to the cool night air outside, the city waiting exactly as he had left it, unchanged, predictable, controlled, and yet, as he stepped into it, he knew something had shifted, not in the world, but in the way he would see it from now on, because once you notice what was always there, you cannot return to not seeing it. And sometimes, the most important information is not what is presented, but what quietly waits to be understood. The city outside moved the same as it always had, steady streams of headlights stretching down the avenue, people passing each other without pause, each step carrying its own urgency, its own destination, and Daniel Brooks stepped into it like he always did, composed, precise, but something in his pace had shifted, not slower, not hesitant, just aware. The car waiting at the curb pulled up instantly, the driver stepping out, opening the door with practiced efficiency, but Daniel did not get in right away. He stood there for a moment, looking back through the tall glass windows of the restaurant, his reflection faint against the warm glow inside, and beyond it, he could still see her. Emily Carter. moving through the room like nothing had happened, like everything had. She carried a tray to another table, nodded politely to a couple, listened as someone spoke, her expression calm, attentive, unremarkable to anyone who had not been paying attention. And yet now, he could see it clearly, the difference between presence and performance, between someone who existed in a space and someone who understood it. His driver waited. The door remained open. The city did not pause. But Daniel did, just long enough to realize that this moment, quiet as it was, would stay with him longer than most deals he closed, longer than most victories he recorded, because it was not about winning. It was about seeing. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, dozens of messages waiting, numbers, decisions, expectations lined up in perfect order. But for once, he did not open any of them. Instead, he lowered the phone again, his gaze returning to the window one last time. Inside, Emily cleared another table, her movements steady, precise, the same rhythm she had maintained all night. And there was no sign that she expected anything to change, no glance toward the door, no shift in posture, no anticipation. She had already moved on, not because it did not matter, but because she understood something most people did not. Moments like that were not meant to be held onto. They were meant to be recognized, then released. Daniel exhaled slowly, something quiet settling into place within him, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a subtle recalibration of how he would move forward, how he would listen, how he would question what he thought he understood. He stepped into the car finally, the door closing with a soft, solid sound, sealing him back into the world he controlled, the world that expected him to decide, to lead, to act without hesitation. The engine started. The car pulled away. And yet, as the city lights blurred past the window, Daniel did not reach for his phone. He did not review the deal. He did not call his team. He simply sat there, watching, thinking, replaying a single moment in his mind. A quiet voice. A simple sentence. A choice that changed everything. Back inside the restaurant, the rhythm continued unchanged. Orders taken, plates served, conversations flowing, and Emily moved through it all with the same quiet presence, unnoticed by most, essential in ways no one measured. When she returned to the station near the kitchen, she set the tray down, her fingers brushing briefly against the edge of the counter, and for just a second, she paused. Not long, just enough to breathe, just enough to acknowledge the shift that had passed through the room and out into the night. Then she reached for the next order pad, her posture steady, her expression composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Because for her, it had not. It was simply another moment where the truth had been there, waiting to be seen. And someone, finally, had seen it. And somewhere between the noise and the silence, between power and perception, a quiet lesson remained, not spoken, not written, but understood. That the loudest voice in the room is not always the one that matters. Sometimes, it is the one that almost goes unheard.